Pluckrose, welcome.
Brent, lovely to be here.
I am so excited to meet you. I have been a big fan of your work, not just you, but obviously, Jim and Peter as well. And I followed you for a really long time, and it's kind of surreal sitting here with you. And I'm a little bit geeked out. Nobody that I know is like, who's Helen Pluckrose? I'm like, are you kidding me? Other than my last guest, sorry. Shout out to George from the Tin Men. He's a big fan as well. So very happy that you're here. This is a topic that's near and dear to me, what you sort of specialize in, which is critical social justice, and sort of, that's one topic. You deal with a great many things. But you do have a new book out, Counterweight Handbook. And as we were saying before we started recording, I wish this came along 2-3 years ago, because this was a big thorn in my side at the time. And so for those that are not aware of Helen's book, it is basically a quick primer. It's not as deep as Cynical Theories, but it is a quick primer on critical social justice, and gives you enough background to understand it. And then there's followed by some practical strategies, if you are in the workplace or in school or whatever, on how to either protect yourself or push back on some of that stuff. Did I encapsulate that correctly? Did I get that right?
Yeah, it's an assembly of resources we gathered right in the eye of the storm. And they were edited up to go into the book, because we were dealing with about 100 people a month who were in danger of being disciplined or fired. So they needed basic knowledge, principled approach, practical strategies.
Got it. And you work with a group called Counterweight, right? Is this a nonprofit, or is it a for-profit consulting firm? It assists people that are dealing with these situations at work, right?
Yeah, we formed Counterweight as a kind of emergency triage situation, and we established it as a limited company, just so that people could send funds to it, and we were funded mostly by the people we helped, just sort of lots and lots of sort of $5 and $10 donations, we essentially, people started emailing me in their hundreds. I was trying to sort of sort out who were the emergencies, who weren't. My head Vulcan, my wingman, Kevin Lowe, set up a Discord server so we could try and pour everyone into it, and then we had a clinic in the middle, and we were dividing people into what kind of problem they were having, what kind of business they were in. And then Carrie Clark, the other co-founder, came in and started sort of gathering information about what people needed, collecting together resources, and this two women, one man team sort of built into about 25 people. They were volunteers mostly, so we didn't make a profit from it at all. We just had running costs, and it was a kind of voluntary organisation, but it was effective. And so I wanted to bring everything together into a book for people. And as you say, it was, I think, of most use about 2 years ago, because that was when everything was really at its storm, and that was when it was in a first draft, and it was almost ready, and then my brain exploded, and I had to pick it up again. So that's what quite a lot of the comments say, is I needed this 2 years ago, and I think, oh.
Well, better late than never, for sure. And it's a fantastic book.
The problems are ongoing.
They definitely are ongoing. By the way, I work in tech. A lot of people know that. Some people may not know that. And I've seen some of this stuff come down the pike, and it certainly, the pendulum seems to be swinging the other way, and that's a great thing. But it is a difficult position to be in, to do your job and to sort of be in fear, the sort of Damocles hanging over your head all the time, that you might say or do something or get sideways of that machine. Particularly those of us who consider ourselves liberal and not racist, and we don't sort of subscribe to this stuff. But we feel oftentimes like you have to, it's almost like you got to go through a struggle session and admit your original sin. And it's like, there's a lot of religious elements to this, but it's very frustrating being in a position of being a decent person that cares about everybody equally and wants to do the right thing and just do their job and be left alone, when you get sucked into some of the more nefarious aspects of that DEI. And it's tough. I shouldn't call it DEI. I really should say critical social justice. So maybe we start there. For people who aren't aware, could you tell us the difference between social justice and critical social justice?
So social justice, of course, it is just justice in the concept of society. So as to distinguish it from, say, criminal justice. And the social justice movement is really quite presumptuous in calling itself that, as though everybody else is aiming for something completely different. But it was actually Robin DiAngelo and Özlem Sensoy who said they don't like the term social justice, they like critical social justice, because that critical tradition that comes down through the critical theories. It starts with Marxism, critical consciousness, Paulo Freire, but it really owes much more to the postmodern concepts of knowledge, power, and language, and that's also a form of critical theories. So that we have critical theory of the Frankfurt School, which is not really what I'm talking about. That's not coming into this as much as a lot of people think it is. It's much more from a postmodern approach, which has been kind of bastardized and simplified, so that we're now looking, when you're looking at things through a critical standpoint, you're not really caring about what is true. So when we think about critical thinking, then we're looking at, is there evidence for this? Is this reasoning good? Is this true? When we're looking at critical consciousness, which woke maps onto very well, so does Red Pill actually. Anybody who thinks they can see through layers of society to underlying power structures that are permeating everything. That's the critical methodology. They're saying we've achieved legal quality in most places now, but there are still these systems like white supremacy, patriarchy, cis heteronormativity that are permeating everything and continuing to keep straight white men essentially in positions of power and disadvantage everybody else. And so we start with that assumption and then read everything through that. And also we have to wake people up to it and dismantle their white supremacy and detoxify their masculinity and decolonize their way of thinking. And it's only when people have awoken to the power systems that theorize to exist and affirm them in themselves and then dismantled them that we can hope to move forwards. That's the underlying concept of critical social justice.
Got it. So is that the origin story of the word woke? Is that from critical consciousness and being awake? Is that sort of...
No, I mean, what the story of woke comes from a much more positive source, really. There's Marcus Garvey was just calling out to people to wake up Africa, but it came really from Lead Belly, and it was after the incident, the Scottsboro Boys, was that the name of it? Five young black men were blamed unfairly for a fight and ended up in prison, and it was because there was this system that it just wasn't going to accept that they had not been the aggressors because they were black.
Right.
And so after his concert, Lead Belly said to everybody, "Stay safe out there, stay woke." And what he meant by that was keep your eye out. Remember that you are in a vulnerable position. Remember that people really are out to get you, and they were. So from that tradition there, where in African American pre-civil rights history, this is where woke comes from. Now we might think that this doesn't necessarily apply to every situation right now. It's if we have these 5 young black men getting sent to prison for innocent men, is not the same thing as complimenting your black colleague on her hairstyle. There's a difference here, and I think it betrays the history of that word. But woke has come to mean this particular thing because people didn't want to use social justice because they didn't want to appear to be against social justice. So they grabbed onto this word woke because that really does capture the thing where they claim to be able to see these systems of power that no one else can.
Got it. That makes sense. I wasn't exactly sure what the origin of it was, but there's something there. And that's why I highlighted the difference between social justice and critical social justice, because I think they're are a great number of people like myself who deeply care about societal inequality, whether that be class, whether that be with respect to race. And there are things, any reasonable person is going to look at, let's take the U.S. justice system, for example. Look at the number of black people that have been incarcerated for victimless crimes, particularly around narcotics. When our government was pumping in crack into the inner cities, that was a CIA thing under Ronald Reagan, right? Like this was intentionally done. So there are structural things going on. I think any reasonable person will say that, right? So how do you separate that from that critical social justice framework? Because I think that's where people get hung up. I think a lot of people really mean well. They have good hearts. They don't harbor any prejudice towards any other group. They're welcoming. They're open. But they're still terrified of critical social justice or the DEI programs in their work.
Yeah. I mean, this is the difference here, that there are still inequalities going on. They are at root, I would say, class inequalities, and that applies. That doesn't dismiss the concept of racial inequality, because the situation, particularly in the US, is that Black Americans were relegated to a subclass, and so this is why they statistically live in poorer areas, have lower income, and have been relegated to an underclass. So it isn't. We can see from various studies that have done that recent immigrants to America from Africa are one of the most successful groups. Mm-hmm. African American descendants of enslaved people are one of the least. So I would say this is a class issue. The way that we look into what inequalities are there is by using material means, by measuring things empirically, by doing really solid empirical research into who is being employed for what levels of education, what access to schooling, to homework resources, to Wi-Fi, to technology, do people have, and then addressing the problem on that material empirical level.
Got it. And that totally makes sense. How would you describe the critical social justice approach to the concept of truth, right? The reason I'm asking is I see a lot of people, and this is I'm speaking on behalf of the well-meaning people who engage with some of this material and get frustrated because a lot of it seems frankly kind of crazy. It doesn't make a lot of sense because a lot of us are rooted in the Enlightenment, scientific method, some sort of rational epistemology, a way to determine truth, right? We're in that sort of mindset, and that school, terrible tea.
We won't get onto the tea, but yes, that
I've failed everybody. It's okay. So talk to me about the way the critical social justice crew looks at a concept like truth and facts and, reality in general, because it's very different from the way most of us do, right?
Yes, so this has undergone sort of several evolutions, because it came first of all from the postmodern concept, which rejected objective truth. It didn't claim that there was no reality, but it claimed that we simply couldn't get at it because we had to mediate it all through language and culture. So that was a straightforward rejection of the attainability of objective truth. The next wave that emerged at around 1989, 1990, and I think Kimberly Crenshaw's Mapping the Margins sets it out best, where she says the whole sort of treating everything as a social construct is good practice. Postmodernism is useful, but we have to accept some things are true or we can't do anything. Bell Hooks also made this argument, and so what Crenshaw and others said we accept is true is that power clusters around certain groups and not around others. So it is these oppressive power systems that we accept as true, and then we work on that basis. Then around 2010, when everything has merged into this intersectional and what we came to call critical social justice ideology, we have a very sort of motivated reasoning on the subject of truth. So we will see activists denigrate science and reason as white Western colonialist ways of knowing, and the idea that we can get at truth that way. They'll denigrate that utterly, particularly in post-colonial, decolonial, indigenous studies. But then the language in which they present their own theories are as absolute facts, as though they are absolutely true. If you read a book by, if you read one of D'Angelo's Nice Racism or White Fragility, you will see that she uses the word facts and evidence, and it is impossible for you not to have been socialised into this. There's even while she cites quite regularly Foucault and the other postmodernists.
Foucault, Derrida is another one.
Yes. Yeah, people, I think so much of it, really, I mean, Derrida is a more significant influence in queer theory and post-colonial theory, but I think Foucault is the overall person. I mean, quite a lot of people be annoyed with me because they see him as having some useful insights in some ways, and I think his panopticon in particular, where he speaks about how we are being, surveillance is on us at all times, causing us to police ourselves. I think there are some insights there. But his concept of knowledge as a construct of power, the powerful people in society get to decide what is true, and they legitimize that knowledge. That turns into the way that we speak about things. Then everybody speaks as though these things are true, and this perpetuates the systems of oppression throughout society without anybody really being aware of it. It's just the way it is. So I often think that if you were to just read one theorist or one breakdown of him, Foucault is the one. And if you look at his citations, this bears it out. He is way ahead. He is at the top. Of the most cited scholar. He's way above Marx, he's way above Marcuse, he's above Derrida and Lyotard, who are also significant. So yeah, Foucault, I feel sometimes like so much of Western civilization is based on the ideas of Augustine, though that came through the philosophical tradition and the Christian tradition through Augustine. And I feel like Foucault has the potential, and at the moment, to have a very similar effect, to just kind of insidiously find his way into everything. And all roads lead back to Foucault.
How does Foucault wrestle with the fact that, and I use the word fact, and I probably shouldn't, the fact that science is able to make predictions, very, very accurate predictions, incredibly accurate predictions, right? So if you talk about the different ways of knowing, I hear that a lot, right? Like Peter's got a great bit where like, if a group over here sacrifices a goat on the hood of their car on a Tuesday, that's equally as valid as a form of knowledge production, as is the scientific method, whereas we can, and give Foucault his due. There's some elements of postmodernism that are true. We do not have direct access to reality. It's mediated through the senses, and there's a bunch of cultural things that are laid on top of it. Fair enough, right? That doesn't mean that we cannot objectively reproduce and make predictions that turn out to be accurate. So how does he wrestle with that? Because I'm trying to steelman his position. I can't see a way out of that.
Well, steelman Foucault by putting out the things that he says that are true. So he looked particularly at mental illness and sexuality. So it is undoubtedly true that for much of Christian history, homosexuality was seen as a heinous sin that people did. Then at the end of the 19th century, it became a shameful disorder that some people had. Then by around the 60s to 80s, we moved into a liberal position of some people are gay, get over it. And now within the queer theory, we're in a position now of having to be radically queer and politically queer and of queer theory ideas. So we can see that discourses have changed, and they are connected to who is in power. So that's how you steelman him. When the church had a lot of power, homosexuality was a heinous sin. When we started to rely more on science, it was a shameful disorder. And when we got more liberal and open, then it was something some people, well, why do you have to have a problem with it? But where he is wrong is, first of all, nobody ever denied that culture exists. That is what this comes down to. Culture exists. Yep. Liberals, and this is why liberals think that language is very powerful as well. This is why we have supported freedom of speech so much. This is why the American Declaration of Independence and First Amendment looks the way it does, is because of the problem with letting the people who have the power decide what can be said. This is how we have the marketplace of ideas, and this is how we have dismantled a lot of very oppressive ideas. We don't have a theocracy now. We don't have feudalism. We don't have patriarchy. Some feminists will disagree with me on that, but I think in all meaningful senses we do not live in a patriarchy now. And we can quite clearly now, I think, see why systems like slavery and colonialism are ethically untenable. So we have made this progress, but what Foucault and others, particularly in queer theory, do is they start at the end of the 19th century. So when it comes to something like science, the first hypotheses that are coming out are based on what is there. But as the scientific method is applied to it, then ideas can change very quickly because it falsifies itself. So as, for example, with Newton, who produced the valuable physics that we're still using today, he was also working on alchemy, because at that point there wasn't a good way to know that wasn't science, that had to be discovered. So when Foucault comes in at the end of the 19th century and the sexologists, they're trying to make a progressive move by saying, let's not consider these men who are attracted to men as sinners. Let's look into this condition that they have. As science has studied this, and as liberalism has grown, this isn't actually a condition. This is just something that a minority of people happen to be. So after hundreds of years of homosexuality being a horrible sin, it really took a few decades of scientific look at it to change that utterly. But the queer theorists and Foucault, they stay at that level where biopower, as Foucault called it, was declaring that homosexuality was a disorder. And because that has happened in the past, we must now be suspicious of science. We ignore how the science has developed, and we just stick at its initial hypotheses.
Got it. That's the prevailing discourse argument, right? Is derived from power. Whoever is in power at the time controls the discourse. Discourse essentially creates reality in some sense, or I don't know if I'm getting that exactly right, but there's something about that. They're very keen on words, right? They're keen on discourses. So maybe you could help me out with the discourses piece, because I feel like the power of language as it relates to power is like a really key concept for them.
Yeah, so whereas liberals will also say that language is important because we can use it to critique each other's ideas. The postmodern tradition doesn't think that that's possible. They think that the people who are in power will just decide what is knowledge, and then the way that they present this, we will all just speak in that way. So discourse would be homosexuality is an evil sin. And then people will just repeat this. They won't challenge it. It's just the way things are. And so we need to break down that discourse. And the way that liberals would say that we should do this is that we question it. We say, well, why? What is a sin? Is it when somebody is harmed? Is anybody harmed if two adults are having consensual sex? Where is the evil here? And we dismantle bad ideas this way. We replace some ideas with others.
Right.
But they don't believe that we can do this. And if you look at the most sort of really popular influential Robin DiAngelo, who underlines most of the training, she will say that it's simply impossible for a white person not to have internalized all of these discourses about black people being unintelligent and criminally inclined suggest to her that actually I can meet an individual who is black without immediately assuming that they're not going to understand what I'm saying or are going to steal my handbag, and she will tell me that this is a form of fragility, and I'm hiding my own whiteness and
this is the Kafka trap, right?
Oh yes,
that's all it is.
Yes,
this is the original sin argument. This is the thing that you can't escape from, which leads me to believe that this critical social justice thing is just a religion. It's just a repackaged religion.
Well, I mean, in the sense that religion is one form of cohesive, totalizing narrative that people can be drawn to because it offers a very simple explanation of society, and it offers something that you can do in your own mind and head to try and make things better. It offers an illusion of control, as religion does. Of course, if I am in a state of grace, then I am working towards the right thing. So it has those things in common. But I often find it unuseful to speak of wokeness or critical social justice as a religion, because it uses the same social and psychological needs, but religion is, I think, a very sort of specific thing. People who have a religion can be liberal or illiberal with it, and I'd like to keep those distinct, but then perhaps I'm conflicted here, because I also think secularism needs to be applied now to totalizing or to any ideologies. We need a separation of woke and state.
Amen to that. No pun intended. Isn't this a direct contradiction to postmodernism, though? Because this appears to me to be a grand narrative, and isn't postmodernism skeptical of grand narratives at a minimum?
Yes, and they even warned that this would happen. Foucault frequently warned that if we try to make this too cohesive, and Lyotard did, if we try to make our theories too explanatory, then they will become discourses. Judith Butler in Gender Trouble, she said she wouldn't call herself postmodern, she's a post-structuralist, but if you start to take on postmodern ideas, then they could become a narrative, and when they do that, they become oppressive, and they were absolutely right. And I think Derrida in particular would not be at all impressed with what is coming out of his ideas now, and Foucault wouldn't be either, although I cannot absolve him, because the ideas that he had were so cynical. They gave so little credit to human individuals and their power of reasoning imperfectly. That I think it was destined to get used for this. If he became influential, there wasn't a way that it would end well.
How did it get into the boardroom? We all know it started with that school and it ended up in academia, but it seemed like it recently jumped very aggressively into the corporate world, into the well, if you have a government job, if you are at a university, if you're at it seems to be very pervasive, and it happened all at once, which is my first signal that this was not organic, right? It definitely seemed manufactured. Do you have any insight into where this thing came from?
Well, I think there are different streams that have been coming to create this problem. So I've followed the intellectual history. The coddling of the American mind was very good for following the sort of psychological developments, and the rise of victimhood culture for the sociological ones, and then a lot of other people are writing about the impact of social media. So all of these different things are combining. I sometimes people think that I'm saying, well, these academics had these ideas and then they just spread everywhere. No, it was a lot more complex than that. But yes, we saw the ideas first. I saw them. I was at university in 2009, 2010. I saw them there. And they really became dominant on around 2013. They hit the mainstream around 2015, and we see this in research that has been done looking at like companies' HR messaging back and forth. It switched in 2015 from the language of civil rights, when it talking about equality, to the language of critical social justice, equity, inclusion, diversity, racial justice. All of these terms, they suddenly appeared in 2015. They hit a peak in 2020. They've been dropping in the US and UK, not in Canada, unfortunately, since then, but it's still very much a present fact. And I think, well, Vivek Ramaswamy, with his Woke Inc. Now, I think that book and a lot of the insights that he gave at the beginning were very valuable. I think he appears to have gone insane now, but that doesn't discredit, and that filled in a gap for me when he spoke about how big companies used to look as though they were doing good things, to have a lot of good PR without actually having to spend much money. That he described how they would say, we're going to plant trees, and then they would all go out and have photos taken of them with shovels, and then they go to the pub.
Sure.
And this is, I think, what has happened here as the critical social justice industry, which a few years ago was at $9 billion in training a year. It has been much easier for large companies who are under pressure from activists, from coming from this academic tradition, and just generally in the influence in society, to look as though they're doing something. It's so much easier for them to do a one-off payment for this training package. It then moves the problem to the employees, who have to dismantle their all of their biases, and they look as though they have done something, but nothing has actually been done. If they wanted to do something that would help, then there could be programs of getting, let's say, tech companies. We have so many tech companies. Getting laptops and Wi-Fi into poor communities, having homework clubs. You could have ongoing things like that. You could bring young people in and give them work experience. You could do practical things to benefit communities that are underrepresented. But this kind of, well, dismantle your unconscious bias. There we go, we've done that. Is, I think, a way of not doing anything.
Interesting. Speaking of that, tell me about implicit association tests. I have seen that in several corporate DEI trainings. What do you think of that?
I think because I've been very careful with that, because I am of the humanities and the developments of these kinds of theories. I'm not a social scientist, so I'm limited in the extent to which I can evaluate these kinds of studies. Lee Jussim is the psychologist who has looked into this most, broken it down, made it accessible, and has a repository now of studies looking into the implicit association test. So I go on his work and that of other evidence-based social psychologists, and it simply, the implicit association test simply doesn't do what it claimed to do. The creators of it in the first place claimed that it could tell whether an individual had bias, particularly against black people. That it seems quite clear that they said that. They now seem to be saying, no, we never said that, but it looks like they said that. And what happens with these tests is that it sees how long it brings up pictures of or words, negative and positive words, and then pictures of black or white people, and it sees how quickly you can associate when asked to do good things with white people and bad things with black people, or vice versa. And if you find it easier to associate good things with white people and bad things with black people, this indicates an unconscious bias. The test does not stand up to scrutiny because you can have different results in the morning and in the evening. It doesn't show implicit bias. It could be explicit bias. You could actually, so many studies now showing that you get a better result of for what people's biases are by asking them. People tend to know what their biases are, and it doesn't even show that you genuinely do associate these things. So somebody who was very concerned about racism and stereotypes against black people, for example, would be likely to associate those negative stereotypes with black people because they are concerned about them, and not because they believe them to be true. So it's just, there are so many confounding elements to it that it's impossible to say if it is actually showing anything at all. And Jesse Singal as well has done some very good sort of breakdowns for the layperson on why it cannot be trusted to do what it says it's doing.
Right, because my understanding of it is, you're right, it's not repeatable. It doesn't have predictive power, which you have to have for anything to be valid. And it completely changes. And also, there's so many confounding variables, like you said, even the ability to move a cursor, or reaction time. There's a whole bunch of things that they didn't account for if I grokked some of the arguments against it correctly.
Yes, I mean that was a very big one that I'm glad you've reminded me of, because people who play video games can do much better on implicit association tests than people who are uncoordinated. Now, I am very uncoordinated. I think I said in the book, my daughter, who is an avid gamer, will not play The Witcher with me now, because I just walk him repeatedly into walls, fall off things. I find it very difficult. And when I did, I chose a test to do, and it was about fat phobia. And I thought, I'll go with that one. I'm fat. That's I think let's see if I have a prejudice. And I came out with an extreme bias against fat people. But because on the last round, it suddenly switched sides. There were 3 rounds where it was doing the same thing, and I was, okay, I'm getting faster at this. I know what I'm doing now. It switched. And I was slower in that round to associate positive things with fat people and negative, and so I have this bias. But once I'd got used to the fact that it does this, and in different tests it does it in different orders, then I managed to eliminate my bias entirely. So this really was a matter of dexterity.
Got it. It always struck me a little bit like the Scientologists with the E-meter. You familiar with that?
No.
Yeah. So L. Ron Hubbard, if you're not aware, was a science fiction writer that created a religion, right? Scientology, and he came up with this something called the E-meter, where it's like 2 cans and there's like a wire between them, and you get audited, meaning somebody asks you a bunch of questions and they can supposedly tell various things like past lives you've had. I mean, it's ridiculous stuff. And when I watched the evidence around the IAT, I was like, this kind of feels like Scientology. This is something that's sciencey sounding, that could potentially indict some people. Like, you take the test, oh my gosh, I've caught the racism, like, and then people believe it to be true, which further entrenches that D'Angelo claim that all white people are racist. And that's a dangerous claim, I think, to make. And I think that you've been working with some clients that are in this space. I know a lot of people, like I said, well-meaning people that feel completely paralyzed. So I want you to talk through some strategies that can help people that might be in a difficult work situation, dealing with some of these more nasty sides of the DEI programs, right? I know that you've given gradated steps, and I loved your book because it wasn't just do this. It was like, here's some strategies, right? Going from like the most safe, which I think was keep your head down and shut up, right? All the way through, to like code red emergency. So could you maybe like talk through, give us like the high level view, kind of like some strategies that people can employ to protect themselves from this?
Well, first of all, the most important thing to do is to have a clear understanding of what kind of problem that you're facing. We've had problems where people have seen the words equity, diversity and inclusion, and they have reacted strongly against it without looking more into what is happening. But a lot of employers now, some, I've helped write some of the policies, are having to use these words, but they are not critical social justice. So make sure that you have the information, see if there is a problem emerging, then come at it from a place of knowledge. So know the theories that you're talking about come from a place of principle. Think through your own principles. It's, in the book, I don't suggest to people what principles they should have, but if you are a Christian, for example, and you are being asked to believe that you have been unavoidably socialized into white supremacy, then you can take the stance, well, no, I believe that God gave me free will in order to, and so I cannot accept this. Or if you are a liberal, you can say, well, I believe people have the ability to reject or accept ideas for themselves. If you are a conservative, perhaps you are likely to have a strong focus on personal responsibility. So whatever it is, think through, because quite often people don't think through their own principles. They hold them strongly and intuitively, but when it comes to articulating them, when faced with a challenge like this, they don't feel quite confident in them. So I kind of encourage people to almost write a constitution of themselves. Why is this a problem to you ethically? What is it? Break down what the problem is. Break down what your thing is. And the good thing with the constitution of yourself is that you can make amendments to it if you realise you're wrong about something, and you can try and prevent yourself from sliding. But you were asking me about strategies. So assume that you have some knowledge and you also have your own principles. Then, depending on what kind of problem you're facing, you're quite likely to be facing most likely, I would say, if you're in a large company, a just kind of a corporate box ticking thing, and you will still find yourself in trouble if you don't comply with everything. But quite often a good strategy here, when you're dealing with an employer or HR company who just wants to get through these courses, they want you to have you affirm these things that you don't believe so they can say they've done something, is to start with by saying, I'm glad that you're addressing racism or whatever it is, because this is a problem. I am concerned about this. Raise the issue, do so in a polite and cooperative way, do it in writing. Try as often as you can to respond in writing, because if you end up in a meeting, then you will very likely be waffled at. What you say will not be spoken. If you have to have a meeting, then make sure you follow it up with an email and have explicit assurances and say things like, I expressed a concern that we would be essentializing people by race, that we would be saying black people think like this and white people think like that, and you assured me that would not be the case, and things like that, to keep this record going. The idea overall with this is that when it is a box ticking exercise, your manager or whoever is probably acting in keeping his or her own head down, wanting to get through it with as little nuisance as possible. So if you can make a very polite persistence nuisance of yourself, you're more likely to be effective. And this, I have to say, works better in the UK than it does in certain parts of the US.
With the employment laws in the United States, you can fire somebody for any reason at any time.
I mean, you can really in the UK as well, but in the US, there are no cause firing policies make people particularly vulnerable. Here, that you can still fire people, but you just have to find a reason. One person was fired for not answering his emails quickly enough after he questioned gender identity. So, but yes, so that's the thing, if you are safe to do so. But raising that point is good. First of all, evaluate what is your job security here? Do you have the ability to push back at this? If you're very much needed in your company, if your job is secure, if you're tenured, if you're in the university, if you have that ability to push back, then great. If your job is very vulnerable, then you might want to take a gentler questioning approach. And this is where we had our 5 approaches. And as you say, the most the softest one was stealth, was just keep your head down and get through it. And for a lot of people, particularly who were training, teacher training, training in social work, counselling in medical professions, we don't want all of them to be fired before they get into their jobs. So we had to assure a lot of people, yes, okay, you will try not to add to the preference falsification thing where everybody thinks that we all agree with this. Try not to buy into it, but when you have to write things, here are some ways that you can write what they want to hear without it's quite difficult to explain. You've seen like my sample letters of how you can write a DEI statement which can actually be consistent with liberal principles but also uses the right words. So
Right.
that's trickier. But yeah, if you have to keep your head down and get through so that you can actually practice as a therapist, a social worker, be a teacher, then we want you to do that. So just get through it. Then there is the gentle approach where you question. You're just saying, this seems good, but are we perhaps assuming that all black people think the same way here? Are we assuming that everybody has a gender identity and that they want to tell it to other people? Is this not perhaps a personal thing? And this can often embolden other people around you. That's the best thing with the gentle approach, is that once somebody isn't nodding along or saying the right things, they will very often find that a lot of other people in their company don't feel that way either. And they will then sort of gently sound each other out. And this can if you can then sort of address an issue as a group, this can be very powerful. Or the workplace culture can just change just by people knowing that they're not alone in thinking this is insane. And then we had the firm approach, if you're in a position to do that. One of our clients, he wrote the most brilliant letter, Tom. He took a very firm approach. He was especially highly sought in the tech firm for his abilities. He could find another job easily, and so he broke it all down and he said, here are the problems with this. This is what these theories are based on. And he was a mixed-raced man. I think in America he would probably just have been assumed to be black. His racial background is much more complicated, but anyway, he was able to come from that position as well, which was obviously an advantage. And he said, I do not agree with this. I am a liberal British man. I believe in the Enlightenment values, in evidence, in reason. I also come from a Christian background. I believe in free will. I cannot support this ideology which is treating me as a racialized entity and not as an individual. I have good relations with all my colleagues. I will not stand by while my white colleagues are being accused of being inherently racist. This never ends well. And he was absolutely brilliant. A lot of people looking at his letter will think that we had a lot of input into that, but we didn't. That was him. It was a wonderful letter. And but yeah, we helped a lot of people write these firm letters when they're in a position to do so, and this can quite often make a manager sort of back off, and then you can get stronger from that. But the one thing that I would really very strongly advise everybody to do, if they possibly can, because the mistake that is most commonly made is when people try to defend themselves on the critical social justice terms. That is a fatal error. If somebody says to you, well, you are a white man, therefore you must be racist and sexist, and you say something like, well, no, I'm not. I respect women very much. My boss is a woman. My wife is
fragility.
Black. Yeah, my wife is black. I've taken part in protests against racism. This simply isn't true. All of this has been theorized, and you will get wiped out. What you need to do instead is try to remove yourself from that and say, yes, I understand this social justice approach to anti-racism. I don't hold it. I take a liberal individualist approach. How can we work together so that you don't have to take on my ideas and I don't have to take on yours, and we can both oppose racism? Now that is a very polite and cooperative thing to say, but you're issuing a challenge there. If you can manage to just keep repeating, saying, yes, I understand and respect that that's your belief and you're right to hold it. I have a different framework for opposing racism. How do we work together? That brings it out of the realm of you being uncooperative with attempts to reduce racism and into the realm of what beliefs you're allowed to have. this will often wake employers up, because they either have to say to the person then, well, no, you're not allowed to be a liberal, a conservative, a libertarian, a socialist. You have to hold these views. You have to oppose racism from this, which is in some places illegal and is in most policies, considered unethical, and they won't usually go to that step. Or they will have to say, okay, yes, you can oppose racism from your own ethical framework.
Got it. I think the problem with some of the earlier, more light touch approaches is you don't know where you stand. Sometimes you just don't, until you begin to be the squeaky wheel. You don't really know. And I think that any pushback at all, even gentle approaches, could flag you in certain organizations as a troublemaker, and you could be greasing your wheels on the way out the door. So I think and this is the thing that troubles me, is that I know so many well-meaning people that actually love to have discussions about important topics like racism, like structural inequality, all of these things that we all deeply care about. And they self-censor. They take that. Almost everybody takes to shut up and pretend. Just tell me what words to say to get through this, and that's a shame to me, because I think there are conversations to be had. I don't think the workplace is the place for activism, but I think because we are in a diverse society with a whole bunch of people from all sorts of backgrounds, particularly if you're in tech, people from everywhere, every religion, every race, every background. You should be having important conversations about how to have a harmonious workplace, right? And how to make sure that we're not unintentionally offending people. There's a lot of utility to this. I think it gets lost by people clamming up and just pretending. And it's just a shame to me. I don't know. It's just a thing that's near and dear to me, because I think that we've missed a lot of golden opportunity, particularly in the United States, with the George Floyd thing and the Black Lives Matter thing that happened. Like, there was a really interesting point in history there, and we could have, as a society, had some important conversations. I feel like this stuff reared its ugly head in earnest during that period of time, and a lot of ground was ceded to some people that I view in a kind of nefarious light. It's kind of tragic.
I think so too. There was certainly a lot of downright opportunism that came in after during the Black Lives Matter protests, and then there were very well-intentioned but overzealous people doing things that were the opposite of helpful. So that the last time I checked, a majority of Black Americans said that those protests and the greater attention that they brought on race was not helpful. And it could have been. And I think what I would say for people who are particularly interested in addressing racism and focusing on it in an ethical way is to have a look at two books in particular. Pamela Fuller's Approach to Unconscious Bias. And so she is I think she's a Hispanic Black American sort of employment consultant. Mm-hmm. And she has a very good approach to this. She talks about why the sort of previous CSJ, of course she doesn't call it that, unconscious bias training haven't worked, and she advocates ways to bring people together. So we include, when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, we're including straight white men in that, making everybody feel as though they belong. She applies the bias, she looks at the biases that we all have, like confirmation bias, affinity bias, and she shows how they apply to everybody. So she is very good, and because she does also obviously address cultural bias, and she looks at studies which show that, say, black women, darker skinned black women advance more slowly in their careers than lighter skinned black women. So too, she shows us do shorter men than taller men. So there are all of these things, but she brings it in. She does not deny that these kind of prejudices exist, and so she is a reputable source who can be cited. The other person who I think is absolutely fantastic and very much valued by people who want to address this kind of thing is Isabel Wilkerson's Cast. And what she does in that, I read it expecting to find it to be more of the usual nonsense that I would criticise, because people on Twitter were saying that she was likening the black experience in America to the Holocaust. But no, what she does is some very rigorous social science, where she looks at how situations can arise in which a certain people can become dehumanized and can become the lowest part of society, the psychological factors that go into that, the societal factors that go into that. And so she looks at Jim Crow in the US, she looks at the rise of anti-Semitism before the Holocaust in Germany, and she looks at the caste system in India. And she's, apart from the fact that she's very vigorous about it, she's looking at human nature, how the worst parts of human nature can be activated by certain systems in society, which is very valuable. She also, by doing this, she pulls the conversation away from everything is white supremacy and anti-blackness. She's obviously looking in one place that white people oppressing white people, if you accept Jewish Ashkenazi Jews as largely white,
right,
and brown people oppressing brown people. And I think this is so very valuable, because this is what is at the root of the problem. It is a human problem. It is our tribalism. It is our tendency to create subordinated classes and hierarchies, and how we can minimise that and maximise a more... another very, very good book, which is underappreciated, is Nicholas Christakis' Blueprint, a guide for an evolutionary guide to a good society. We have to work with human nature if we're going to maximise our more cohesive, cooperative aspects and minimise our divisive, tribalistic ones.
Right.
But yes, people who want to address racism at work, using Isabel Wilkerson and Pamela Fuller is what I would recommend the place for them to start.
Awesome. Thanks for that. I want to ask a question, because I was told this is a conspiracy theory. So you wrote that book, Cynical Theories, with Jim Lindsay. And I think one of the claims was the sort of critical social justice movement, the strategy is to apply constant cynical criticism to Western society as a solvent, right? To completely dissolve the Enlightenment values in Western society and build a Marxist utopia on top of it. Is that the claim from the book, or did I hallucinate that?
No. Jim has changed his views since then, but in Cynical Theories, I was very clear that this is not Marxism. This that there are elements of Marxist ideas in there, because there are some in postmodernism, but it's very much like I say, when people confuse Marxism and postmodernism, I'd say it's much like Judaism and Christianity. You're going to see consistent features because they're coming from the same tradition. But if you tried to criticize Christianity as though it was Judaism, you're missing the main point, which is Christ. So, and it's the same with the critical social justice theories. The Marxists, who can be criticised on their own account, I don't think they're terribly realistic in a lot of the ways, but they have produced some of the best critiques of critical social justice right from the beginning, when it was postmodernism, right there, going back to Chomsky versus Foucault, and looking at, if you go to the World Socialist website and you search the pseudo-left, that's how they refer to the woke and their work on the Hannah Nicole Jones project. So that the socialists have always identified, and Marxists have always identified, critical social justice as a form of neoliberal identitarianism that divides the working class and prevents us from getting at the real root of the problem. So I find common ground with, and I own my biases here. I am economically left-wing. I'm not socialist. I support a capitalist system because of the evidence that it does actually benefit society. But I will tax you quite a lot, which
right.
which doesn't go down well. But no, that's people who I think who are talking about cultural Marxism, or they're expecting postmodernist and critical social justice to suddenly start caring about socioeconomic status, and it's not going to happen. It's a very neoliberal movement.
Got it. The reason I bring that up is because I think you and I both share from previous discussions a disdain for authoritarianism. And it feels like the critical social justice crew is incredibly authoritarian and illiberal in their mindset. And so this is a meta question for you. And I know that you're involved with Project Liberal, and they're one of their aims is to push back against authoritarianism. What are your thoughts on the best strategies to push back against authoritarianism? Because I'm in America, and I have got running for president this year an authoritarian or an authoritarian.
Do you think so?
That's the only option, right? And it seems like with each successive election, it gets more authoritarian, and I'm not seeing a retreat in any way, shape, or form. So I guess my question is, do you have thoughts on how we can push back against that? Because I know we have our disagreements about a political philosophy, and that's fine. I think the point where you and I get to a point where it's a meaningful disagreement is so far down the road that it's absolutely impertinent. So I share your vision with pushing back here, and I want to be a partner. And so, but I'm also feeling a little bit jaded right now. It feels very not a lot of hope out there. It seems like it's very much pushing authoritarian, and you're one of the smartest people I know, and I know you probably thought about this quite deeply. So what are your thoughts? Like, how can we push back on authoritarianism?
I'd say we have to go for it on a cultural level, because what we are seeing now is the reason that and here in the UK as well, people are being drawn to what they see as strongman or authoritarian leaders, and this is because they are feeling a sense of threat. John Haidt wrote a wonderful very long read, and it was called when nationalism beats globalism, or when globalism, something like that. Anyway, and he cited the psychologist Karen Stenner about the authoritarian button. So when we are feeling secure as a species, this is when we get more liberal, we get more rational, we are more inclined to care about the rights of everybody. When we feel under threat, then we retreat into what Stenner calls our survival values, which is very much stamping out dissent within our own group, narrowing in and caring about our own group, viewing the opposing groups as evil, and this is when it really starts to feel like a more authoritarian leadership is what is needed to solve the problem. And then this, of course, terrifies the people on the other side who then go more into their survival values, and they start looking for a more authoritarian leader as well. And I think on a cultural level, what we need to do is pull back from this kind of existential dread. We need to try to unpress the authoritarian button. This is what how Karen Stenner describes it. There are always authoritarians in society, but she's looking at the right wing in this particular thing. So there are some conservatives who are not by nature authoritarian, but if they are convinced that they are in an existential emergency, then it is as though a button gets pressed and they will become authoritarian. And what liberals like me, like you, like Project Liberal are trying to do is unpress that button and trying to get people to come together. And so one of the big things, the big projects that I'm involved in with Project Liberal and with others is trying to bring together liberal conservatives, liberal socialists, liberal, and I would say I'm a liberal leftist. We have the classical liberals who are sort of more economically based and leaning towards the right. We have the libertarians, who you could say are the pure liberals on the economic and social function, and we have liberal Christians, liberal Muslims, liberal Jews, liberal anti-racist, liberal LGBT activists. We need the benefit that we have, all of us, is that we can work together in a way that the authoritarians of all of those groups can't. But the problem with liberals is that we tend to be so individualistic that it is like herding cats. So trying to get liberals to actually come together around an idea and push out the authoritarians together can be extremely difficult. So that's something that I'm working on at the moment. I work with a liberal conservative colleague, Mike Burke, and we have very similar ideas when we differ on financial things and some sort of issues of cultural integrity things. I'm more leaning towards multiculturalism, and he is as long as it's anyway, it's complicated, but we're in different places, but we are both united around opposing the authoritarians. Mm-hmm. He's very good at pushing back at the conservatives who have become authoritarian and pointing out that that this is not what conservatism is, that the liberal tradition has grown up in the conservative philosophical tradition as well. I am good particularly at addressing the people on the left who seem to have forgotten that liberalism has been freedom of speech and belief is very much a left-wing thing, and if we can bring more people together like this, on an individual level, defend the rights of someone who you disagree with. Just doing little things like that, trying to simmer down the heat, because of course politicians emerge on platforms that will sell. They're getting more authoritarian because that will make people vote for them. We cannot solve that problem unless we can change culture, and that takes everybody who is liberal in that most basic sense. If you are somebody who believes that people should be allowed to believe, speak, live as they see fit, provided it does no harm to anyone else nor denies them the same freedom, then you are a liberal in that broadest sense, even if you don't call yourself a liberal, and we can work together on pushing out the authoritarians.
Fantastic. That's a great place to end it, Helen. Thank you so much for coming by. This has been a fascinating conversation. I could have done 3 more hours, but we got to cut you loose. Thank you, and tell everyone where to find you online.
I am the overflowings of the liberal brain with Helen Pluckrose.com. So hpluckrose.com is where I am mostly. I post things on Twitter at hpluckrose, but I'm not there anymore.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Good to talk to you.